Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining today's Safety Roundtable session. Going to be talking about a really important and interesting topic today, one that affects us all, and one that I think we can learn a lot from our guest about today, who's got a really interesting backstory, which I'm sure she'll talk to us a little bit about as we get going. This, as always, is an interactive session. So if you're joining us on Zoom, then feel free to go to reactions, raise your hand, and we'll call you up and you can have a chat with Petra and I. If you're watching us on LinkedIn or YouTube or wherever, and you want to ask a question, then feel free to type something in the chat. I'll do my best to be monitoring that as we go. But I'd always encourage people to join us on the Zoom because that is the best way to make the most of the session. If you haven't come to a safety roundtable before, just quickly, it's very much designed to be an interactive experience. So we cover a different topic each 2 weeks. It could be me, like today, with a guest, or me talking about something, and then opening up to a discussion. So do get involved and do share the word and get other colleagues and safety risk related friends involved as well. So with that, I would like to introduce our guest, Petra. Petra, you have got a really interesting story and journey. Could you just give us a quick overview of that and kind of why that led you down this path around mental health and well-being?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I appreciate all the people who are joining for this really important topic. So I'm a mental health consultant, psychotherapist, and a coach, and I work with organizations to help them create mentally healthy organizations. So to think, what does good look like and how do we get there? But like many of us in the mental health space, it's deeply personal. So I was born and raised in a religious cult, one of the worst ones out there, apparently. I think it's like number 29 of the top 100. I don't know, according to some sort of list. But what's interesting is throughout my journey, seeing similarities between how I grew up, which arguably was quite toxic, and workplaces today. You know, the hierarchy of leadership and the way we don't question things and just sort of go along with them. And so my story is very much, I was born into this reality, so thought this was the normal way of living. And it was in my sort of late teens and early 20s that I then spiraled into, oh my goodness, I've been lied to, like nothing's true. And I didn't go to school as a kid. We traveled all over the world. In case you're wondering where my somewhat Canadian accent is from, I'm not Canadian, I'm Dutch, but I grew up in India, Brazil, Russia, all over the place. And I guess I had to hit my own rock bottom moments with addiction and depression and poor mental health in order to then, I guess, teach myself first, like, how do I build my own resilience, my mindset? And then I realized that we could have a ripple effect and create change with those around us, and workplaces kind of became a thing I'm quite passionate about. That's the short version.
That's the short version.
Yeah.
You've got a book, haven't you? Do you go into the more detail in your book into that
I
that
really
journey?
do. So yeah, so you can see it
Yeah.
there. So Begin With You is my first book, and I do go into some story, and of course I'm open to questions if people have them. And I do have a second book coming out, which is around tech addiction and digital well-being. So I'm quite excited about that, given how, I guess, disconnected many people are feeling both at home and at work.
Yeah, that's interesting, and that is a topic that resonates with me because I've got two young kids, and I'm sort of trying to guard against that. So maybe let's touch on that a bit later on. Um, so from the perspective of obviously what you went through, you mentioned the two words resilience and mindset. How important are those to, I guess, getting on top of this subject and overcoming it from a sort of personal perspective?
I mean, hugely. I talk a lot about how we need to take What I learned is we can, in fact, take responsibility for our mental health. So often the narrative is, it's a chemical imbalance and it's just sort of on this side of things if you're depressed or anxious. But very often, not always, but very often, it's about lifestyle. and it's about what's going on around us that's
Mm.
affecting us, right? Maybe not living the fullest version of our life, and we're depressed because it's easier in a way to feel that way than to do something different about it. And so for me, I certainly was stuck in what I would call a victim mindset. You know, hey, I didn't go to school. I was then 22 and was pregnant. I moved to London, so I was outside of the cult, but really kind of lost all my support network other than my partner who would go to work. And there I was thinking, how do I do life not having gone to school? So there's some tactical things like getting sober taught me how to be honest and how to be accountable, going to sort of recovery groups, which was very useful for me. And then I learned slowly that the way we think, we don't have to believe all of our thoughts. What a revelation, right? And we can actually train our brain to think differently, right? And so for me, it had to get really bad. In fact, the story goes, and this is my reality, that I woke up one day and I had two young kids downstairs, and I was in the throes of alcohol addiction and just the worst place of depression. And I remember waking up as if it was yesterday, sort of staring at the ceiling, thinking, "This is it. Like I can't do another day." Like I was ready to check out. I was feeling suicidal, and for some reason that day, a second thought popped into my head. And that second thought, and this is not advice, it's just my story. The second thought was, what if I postponed taking my life by 1 year? And I don't know why that the kind of timeline came into play or what happened, but for some reason, it freed me up to experiment with all the things that people said could support your mindset and your mental health. And these days, I know it's almost like information overload, even with well-being practices, right? You do 25 things before 7 a.m. or 5 a.m. for some of us, right? In order to hustle well-being. And
Yeah.
I think it's really overwhelming us. So for me, I ended up, without realizing what I was doing one small thing every day, the tiniest thing, and then just kind of going, does this work? Does this not work? Is it helping? Is it not helping? And so for
Mm.
me, this is never overnight success, is it? It's 20 years of trying to think differently, getting backup and support. And that's what then the outcome is resilience. You don't just practice resilience, you get resilience through doing the other bits of work.
Mm. Loads and loads to unpack there. Given the audience is primarily going to be safety risk management professionals who are overseeing that, and a lot of them, I guess, would incorporate well-being within their organizations. I'm really interested to go down that rabbit hole a bit of what you said about kind of the environmental factors here. So it's not, it's kind of what are the things that are affecting you? Because I suppose that's what the audience are going to be able to try and influence and control. They can't force people to think in a certain way and so on, but they can sort of start to control this environment around us.
I mean, environment is key, and I think safety professionals understand almost more than other people what prevention means because you've
Mm.
been sort of working in that with that mindset for a longer time than people in the mental health space have been. So this idea of what is a mentally healthy culture, or take away mentally and just say what is a healthy culture, right? And so our environment has an impact as far as safety, what you're thinking, but
Mm.
also to be mentally healthily safe, it's the psychosocial risks, right? So it's like, how are we thinking about our managers, the type of language that we use? If people feel isolated, how do we sort of proactively connect and create a sense of belonging? So there's many things to think about with prevention, and then just team. So
Mm.
again, we're more isolated than ever, and I know people are working in a variety of contexts, but there's so much change these days, and there's so many people struggling with a variety of things that if we come at it from that prevention perspective, that is our environment. It's our emotional environment and our physical environment.
Yeah. And I see Tamara's got her hand up. I'm just going to ask a question and then I'll bring Tamara in. So, how good, I don't know if good is the right word, but how well, even if that may not be the best word either, but sort of how well is the average organization doing then on this, based on your experience? Are we, on average, a 4 out of 10 or a 6 out of 10, or whereabouts are we?
So I think it's tricky to put a number on it because the bigger the organization, I would hesitate to put one number on the entire
Yeah.
organization often, right? It's often departmental, it's often team focused. You can have a really psychologically safe team because that leader or manager is that buffer between any toxicity and really invests in their people and creates safe spaces. And you can have a more of a toxic workforce on the whole, right? So it's more
Mm.
about you would might grade on pockets within the business. And so for the people here, I'd really think, what is my sphere of influence, right? Am I kind of senior leadership, sort of leading from the top? Or am I in a department where I have a little bit of influence, but not loads, right? So how do we create change from within and start there and then create our ripple effect outwards?
Okay. We'll talk a bit more about some strategies and principles that we can take away in a minute. But Tamara, did you want to unmute and ask a question?
Hi. Yeah, no, I was hoping that you would take it exactly where you started to take it, Petra, about the pockets, the teams, right? It's a very daunting topic. I've actually had to navigate kind of we term it working functioning alcoholics for a reason in the
Yeah.
workplace, as well as individuals who were going down the path of wanting to be suicidal, right? And so that's the kind of thing that as health and safety professionals, we're being more and more aware of. I think it's always been there. It's not that it's not been there, but I think that we're having more discussions around it. So if you could share with us from your side of the perception, what
Mhm.
could health and safety professionals be doing to better support those who are struggling?
Great question. Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, I think firstly, and maybe some of you do this already, I think suicide awareness training of some kind is crucial. Sorry, Tamara, just were you going to
Right.
add something? Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, just suicide training is not required, actually, just to
Right.
share that
Thank
with
you.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So from my perspective, I think suicide awareness training should be required, is what I'm trying to say, I guess, and just
Mm.
gauging where people are at. But at the same time, and when I sort of talk on stage and sort of share slides and that sort of thing, I really kind of highlight that often suicide awareness training is focusing on more obvious signs and symptoms and not necessarily thinking about how do we normalize this conversation in general, because the person who might be struggling the most is not might be your highest performer, might not show on their face, might not be withdrawn or the classic kind of suicidal symptoms, right? There's often a whole range of, when people pass this way, unfortunately, very often they're described as the life and soul of the party, the person other people went to for advice or support, So when I talk about prevention, I'm talking about normalizing conversations around this, but also as leaders and managers, how do we check in on people effectively? And if you do suicide awareness training, you'll know that there's a lot of fear about asking a direct question when it comes to this topic. But actually, all the evidence suggests that asking a direct question is the most useful thing to do. And you might say it in a way, that's make sure the person is safe and comfortable. But I'd say something like, I could be totally wrong. So I kind of put that phrase out there first. I could be totally wrong, but I'm worried about this, this, and this. And I just want to check in. And even if they back off and they say, no, no, I'm good, because, there's lots of stigma and taboos out there,
Mm.
you have still planted a seed as being someone who's trustworthy that if they are ready to talk to someone, you might be the person that they go to. I mean, a huge topic, just the suicide awareness piece. But I also think formally and informally having ways to check in on our people. And I think, I've got a guy who works in my team who's worked on construction sites, and he talks about going through a mental health struggle and then, shooting his hand with a gun, like a nail gun. Sorry. So he had a physical health condition or issue that health and safety would have to consider, but actually it was his mental health that put him in that state of mind for that to happen. So just kind of connecting all the dots to know that these things are connected. And really, I wish it was required that we had some kind of training for you guys to go in deep on this topic. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, no, thanks, Tamara. I attended a event and somebody was speaking. I should actually get her on to the podcast or one of these events to talk about this from a big organization. And they had surveyed their staff, and we're talking in the thousands, maybe tens of thousands around the world. And perhaps this was my ignorance, but I was really staggered by this. Of the under 40s, I think it was under 40s, it was something like over 53, 54%, just over half of people had some kind of suicidal ideation. And that just sort of took my breath away, because if it had been, had some mental health struggles, I would have thought that would be low. But for it to have gone that far, in my mind, I was really taken aback by that.
And we know that these days things like financial stressors, the news, the geopolitical kind of challenges that people are facing, all of this is kind of stacking. Digital health is all stacking on top of people, and really sometimes making them feel like they're backed in a corner and there's no other way out. And I remember having 2 young kids, and my brain told me they would be better off without me. And you think you're a mother, you're a parent, like, of course that wouldn't be the case, but it was. And unless you've been in that situation, you don't quite understand how the brain can play tricks on you. And so I quite openly talk about this as a concept in general with people, so that it isn't just this scary topic that we only touch on when we've had the worst news or something terrible's happened.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that under 40. I would be interested in what is the numbers for above 50 when people are going through aging changes, for like menopause, or finding out that they might be a type 2 diabetes or other health issues, right? Which is, again, topics we don't talk about, but it can be very depressing as you age, and your body is becoming your worst enemy, if you will, and the thoughts that go through your head there. So it's all through different steps of life. And I think that as health and safety professionals, it doesn't mean that we're mental health workers and we start dealing in deep with people's mental health. But I'd be very supportive of the idea of us becoming aware. What are your thoughts around that? What could we be doing to help create more of an environment where it's normalized to just talk about these things? You touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, and I love that you say that. And Chris, if you don't mind, I see this just comment from Vincent as well. That
I was gonna ask you about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it sort of touches on the same point. So that prevention piece, and of course, it would be better to just to read your quote: identify, then eliminate the work causes of suicide ideation rather than wait until the person is ready to end their lives. Absolutely, prevention is always better than cure. And unfortunately, when it goes very to the extreme, it's hard to catch it sometimes, and we often miss it. So how do we normalize conversations just about the human experience? To Tamara's point, menopause, aging, people who have kids, people who have illness in their family, there's a whole range of things that we all experience, right? And I would say that there can be work causes of suicide ideation, such as people being very isolated, not having much autonomy, a toxic boss, sort of bullying, or we can think of those more sort of day-to-day things that might happen in the workplace, unfortunately. But also, it's a question of how somebody thinks and what support is outside of work as well as inside of work. So I'm always hesitant to say it's one side or the other. because many managers are like, they need to sort out their personal stuff. And then on that side, it's like, hey, there's work context as well that we need support with. So certainly we need to normalize conversations in the workplace, but also there's something about connection. Now we know that the male suicide rate is higher than female. We know that in the types of industries you guys work in, there's a high male demographic, and talking is just a little bit harder, right? It's not kind of normalized. But there's ways that we can open conversations that are actually meeting people where they're at. And there's amazingly in the UK and moving across the globe, like loads of men's groups popping up. There's the Proper Blokes Club, there's Talk Club that's in a bar. There's like places where guys can kind of get together and create that community and support. And I would usually ask guys and women, I would ask all people, do you have 2 to 5 people in your life that you can fully be yourself with? And unfortunately, the statistics are often people have 1 or 0 people, right? So this is what I want to talk about is connection, and then creating those spaces where we can go beneath asking about the weather, the weekend, or football, please, and actually use those as a gateway into a deeper conversation.
Yeah, I hope that answered, Vince, your point. Christian, you've got your hand up. Do you want to ask a question?
Oh, just mute.
Just unmute yourself. Go on.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I just want to dwell on a little bit of what she said about, sorry, I didn't really get her name.
Petra. That's
Hello,
okay.
Angel. Petra, you okay?
Good, thank you.
You look great.
Thanks.
Right. I just want to dwell on the part you mentioned about having friends you discuss with on a more deeper level. I think that as well, we have a good and effective interpersonal relationship at work. Yeah, this is something that is really going to help because not everybody will want to share what they are going through to everyone. So it's important that that area of skill in the workforce is really looked into, especially before teams are set up in every organization. So it's important that every organization, mostly high risk sectors, they tend to ensure that area of skill is in place and is fully implemented. Good interpersonal relationship skills. So this will actually help people to relate better, and they can actually share things that are actually bothering them, because whatever personal issues you could be having will definitely reflect on your performance at work. So it's important that that particular area is looked into. And the area of being observant, yeah, one of our colleagues mentioned that it's also very key. It's important we are observant of, just we check about people's expression, because some people might even be close with the team, but they might still be finding it difficult to share. So maybe what we do is to be observant, look at the expression, look at the performance, and know what is happening. So, because I've heard of situations where the work was so stressful, and there was a particular guy that went to the loo, and he actually slumped, in the toilet. So things like that, we should be observant about that too. And in every organization, I will also advise that HSC team have an effective collaboration with the HR team. That's the human resource team. It's important so we can actually go through our colleague, especially the technical guys, and of course the administrative guys are also very important, but let's go work with the HR team. So we look at the leave rosters of these our colleagues and ensure that our leave rosters are effectively implemented, because you just see folks just there are some guys that love the job so much and they just want to leave the job, but probably because of stress from the work, it's actually affecting their mental health. So I think one area is to ensure the leave rosters are actually not just with documented but actually implemented. So this is where the and the HSC team work have a good collaboration with the HR team to ensure that the rosters are leave rosters are actually implemented. This will actually give opportunity for them to rest, see how they can relax and so the stress level, because sometimes when there are mental issues, maybe like you said, some boss that could actually be bossy, so probably when you stay off the work for a certain week and rest, then, and of course during the process of that rest, there should be, check up. We can like our colleagues said, we're not like a mental health organization, but it's important we check on ourselves, and that's where the effective, good interpersonal communication skills, like is actually being implemented in, and I think
Christian, that's great. We'll let Petra answer that because there's quite a lot there.
I had to take
Okay.
notes because there's lots to respond to, but really good to see you trying different things and understanding the fundamentals of interpersonal skills. So a couple of things. People need to feel seen, heard, and valued. So they might not want to tell you their whole life story. They might never want to go to the workplace or the safety team and tell their whole life story, but we can help them feel seen, heard, and valued by noticing something that they've said or making it personal and not just about work sometimes, right? So, and we want that as well, no matter who we are, right? So there's another piece just around psychological safety. So how do we build psychological safety so that people who do want to talk can feel safe enough to do so and comfortable? But there's an interesting thing about how you build trust. You can read all the books, and there's a great one called The Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson on the topic of psychological safety. But there's this thing, you build trust by leading by example. You build trust by bringing a little bit of yourself into the conversation and into the connection yourself. Very often, safety, HR, even leaders will think, well, my job is to make that person feel safe and to tell them they can come to me. But the way human interaction works is it's both sides. You bring a bit of yourself, you lead by example in saying something like, it doesn't always have to be crisis, right? It can be, oh, I got a terrible night's sleep last night because I really am not well, or my child was awake or whatever, and that's really affecting my focus today. I really need your backup. So you're saying, like, you're connecting the dots between your physical and mental health and your performance, right? And it could also be asking people things like not just what's wrong today, but what's one thing that's going well today. I think we all need a little bit more uplift in thinking about good mental health, not just bad mental health. If you think of, you may have seen the mental health continuum, which is basically we move up and down depending on what's going on in our life. In the middle is survival. Then we've got thriving and excelling. And on the other sides are crisis and struggling. But so often when we think mental health, we're just thinking about crisis and struggling. And we're not thinking, what is the environment that will help people to thrive? And then finally, to your points around HR and safety working together. Oh my goodness, it's the biggest frustration of my life that people who want to look after other people who are in the same organization feel like they're in silos or working against each other, right? Like, because they're maybe competing for budgets, or maybe they have a slightly different agenda. And really, 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 it's ideal for culture and engagement, leadership, HR, and safety to, of course, be coordinated in how they're supporting their people.
Yeah, good old silos. Can't beat those.
Oh.
One thing that I was interested by in this this question from Christian was the piece around work, because I mean, it might just be my experience, but I feel like when I was in kind of professional services before I got involved in what I do now, I would have felt quite stronger than awkward. I would have felt uncomfortable kind of raising this with a colleague, because there was this kind of competitiveness and this kind of excellence. And I don't know, maybe that was just, maybe that's me rather than the way that it is. But I'm just interested to hear, like, do you find people are kind of more willing to open up to colleagues at work or people in the workplace rather than, away from work, given that there's that kind of dichotomy of, we want to be helpful and be well and so on, but there's also potentially, you know, I'm going for this promotion and so on and so forth.
I think everybody's different. There's some common themes, but it kind of depends on industries. Like you said, professional services. If I work in law firms, I'm like, everyone's been competitive since the day they graduated from anything. And even then, it's so ingrained to be a particular way. So some people find, then this is the interesting thing when managers are thinking, oh, if we talk about mental health, everyone's going to take time off and nobody's going to get the job done is a classic sort of fear. But we need to think that, you know, actually having conversations, work can be a protective factor for some people. They might go home to a flat on their own because they've just got divorced and they're sitting with the booze and whatever, right? The unhealthy coping mechanisms. So sometimes for some people, work is that protective factor where they're like, oh my goodness, I have a rapport with my safety team or a rapport with my manager or even a mate, you know, so, you know, a colleague, someone that you work with. That might be the only place I feel seen, heard, and valued. And for other people, that boundary is pretty strict. I want to show up at work. I'm competing there, you know, and I'm going to talk to my wife or my partner or a friend outside of work or a therapist or a coach, whatever it might be. So we need to get away from, you know, 3-step formulas that are supposed to apply to everyone, right? And actually create space for individuality and just getting to know our people. It's actually really simple, but not easy, right? To spend that 1 minute where you're not in a meeting, where you're not rushing around to just say, hey, what's really going on for you? This is a real question I ask my team. What's one challenge you're facing at the moment, either personally or professionally? We actually ask each other, how's your mental health today? Because that's how extreme we are, right?
Yeah.
So there are other ways, but I guess you've got to move from where you are and one step kind of further and take people along with you.
Yeah, yeah. Tamara?
I get what you're saying, Christian, because when I was working in the store at Metro, we had over 200 staff. And those 200 staff were also on different shifts, right? So I'm sure, and a lot of other people are feeling this in the room, is that you're not always on site for a quality amount of time with those individuals. And so you're pretty much, for most part, for many of them, a stranger that's coming in and out, maybe once or twice a year. What about how could we maybe be working with the supervisor and management team, because there's more of them inside the workplace, in order to create that culture of care? What's your suggestions for maybe that route?
Beautiful.
Yeah, there was a comment as well, actually, making a similar point where, you know, if you're dealing with 250 people on site, you know, how can you deal with this at scale rather than on that one-to-one basis?
Sure. And of course, in the business that I run, there's 3 key elements to what we do. The first one is strategy. So how do we have a strategic approach connected to business objectives? And that very much needs to take the culture where it's at and see who are the key individuals that are influencers in the business. And it might not be your manager. It might be the guy that people just go and talk to, right? He might be the guy that could just use a little bit of training and you know, because people are gravitating to that person anyway. So strategically, you kind of want to think, okay, who are the key people? And then what is the training that is needed? And not just training on the worst case scenario of what are the suicide statistics, but what are the practical and uplifting ways that I notice and check in on my people on a daily basis, not just waiting and like being like a meerkat trying to check for signs and symptoms of poor mental health, right? I call it the meerkat effect, which is what we're often doing, right? So, but then if you've got those 200 people, like, don't underestimate the power of the interactions that you have with 5 to 10 people. And if that's powerful enough, what that ripple effect is outwards, right? And so when I talk to somebody for 30 minutes, I'm going to probably ask them something about their soul or their purpose, or something that's a bit deeper than, again, the weather or the weekend, right? And that makes an impression. People are like, oh, this person is brave enough to ask me what's going good in my life, or what am I grateful for, or how can they help, things like that. So it's like active listening, and the ability to ask empowering questions, but also to lead by example. And so it's how we live our life that is contagious and affects other people. And equally, of course, we want to then empower individuals. I'm a big advocate for leadership and management training to support those interpersonal skills that Christian talked about, because we can't do this alone, but we've got to talk to each other because we're all on the same side.
Yeah. That's some good ideas and concepts there, and it's going through the chat. There's definitely people asking questions about that, so I'm glad we covered that one off. Christian, you've got your hand up again. Did you want to ask another question?
Okay. All right. I was wondering, I'm sure, what about a situation where you have the 200 teams and you have within that 200 teams, you have a sub teams, and within those sub teams, you have safety champions. So within those safety champions, those sub teams can communicate with themselves, and this can actually get to you as probably the head or the manager of safety, and the issue could be addressed. So what do you think? I think that would probably fall under the area of the strategy, having safety champions within those the 200 teams, that probably within the 200 teams you have sub teams.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, everyone's going to have slightly different structures, but I think we'll relate to, there's all these different pockets, these different teams, and safety champions are great. Get them some well-being champion training as well. Just add to their skill set if they're already passionate about what they do. Perhaps that might be a different group of people. I know some people have mental health first aiders. I quite like the champion or ambassador approach because it's more about that uplifting. And I see this note from Matthew just around mental health needing a rebrand. So it's like to rebrand that it's not just the mental illness suicide bit, but it's actually how do we all look out for each other and invest in our own well-being in order to consistently perform. So certainly whatever's in your group, your organization, if there's pieces like that, safety champions, just add to their skill set or see if there's a particular skill set you need on the ground with the people.
Yeah. We've spoken a bit about kind of things when they've got to the more serious end, shall we say. But I know that, and you touched on this earlier about how your mental wellness can affect the likelihood of an accident or an incident happening, for example. I know that there's a big issue with presenteeism. What's your view on that, and how do we approach that? And is it kind of the same way, be proactive, have those conversations, or is there something a bit different about presenteeism?
So for people who don't know, presenteeism is when you show up at work, but you're not really being productive. But you're there, you're clocking in, you're clocking out, but you're not really, and it's costing the business money, right? And this makes me think Vincent has been making some cool comments. Thank you, Vincent. Just around, I think you said something like, whatever happened to, meaningful work that is safe and that, allows you the environment to boost your mental health. And I completely agree with that. We kind of check out when we don't feel included, when we're treated poorly, or we don't have autonomy over our job, or when we're really stressed. So when we're really stressed, and you'll probably know this, but your body goes into fight, flight, or freeze, right? And these days, stress is coming from work, but it's also coming from our devices that have notifications going all the time, telling us what the worst things in the world that are happening. Bad news travels 6 times faster than good news, apparently. And so no wonder people are in a state of overwhelm. Now, when you're in a state of fight or flight or stress, you are unable to make creative decisions that allow you to do great work, resource, and recover yourself. You can push yourself really hard and override your system for a little while, but that's, to your point, Christian, when accidents occur. So presenteeism is a big thing because it's individual, but it's also systemic. So what is or how does the organization motivate or incentivize good work? And so, I mean, there's lots of nuance there, but those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, I think that is a challenge that people are grappling with, and we all have days when we're more or less productive. I certainly have days where I am sort of really on it and I get loads done, and I have other days where it's a real struggle to get anything productive done at all. And I'm kind of fortunate that I've got my own business and I can sort of ride that wave a little bit. But,
Right.
it's not easy to do that if you're in a job, I'm sure. Tamara.
I'm just gonna, yeah, I just wanted to bring forward the idea about exclusion and being ostracized,
Mhm.
and how impactful it can be on emotionally eroding and breaking people down. We often think like, oh, well, it's not such a big deal because they have supports maybe outside of work. But when you stop and you think how much time we spend in work, for most people, it's more than 8 hours, and we are tribal beings.
Totally.
And if you look historically, we used ostracizing somebody from the tribe as a punishment. Can we maybe dig into that a little bit? Because that's a real critical issue that's also being overlooked.
It's a big one. It's a big one. Thank you. It's a big one because there's the micro version, which is sort of triggers and how we react to people. And I say triggers, like that word is way too overused these days. But a trigger just means that a reaction that you're having to a situation is bigger than what the situation actually calls for. And so when we're stressed as well, when we have little I want to say little conflicts. That sounds like an oxymoron, but little challenges with somebody, they can feel significantly bigger because we're stressed. We're in sort of attack mode. We're in that fight or flight sort of place. And so Dr. Brené Brown says it's hard to hate people up close. And so there's something in a skill that takes bravery, which is leaning in, even when people maybe don't agree with our views. And we're becoming very black and white and polarized just in the world. If we look at the political landscape, if we look at inclusion even, you're either on this side or you're on this side. And this is like workplace is just a microcosm of that bigger global kind of challenge that we're seeing these days. And so it does start with us as far as leaning in to some of the topics that are outside of our algorithms, right? That are just feeding us stuff that allows us to agree with ourselves the whole time. And I certainly agree with you because I mean, I grew up in a cult. That's how you got rid of people. You ostracized them, you bullied them, you made them feel unimportant and like they didn't exist, right? And people's mental health is still struggling today, even if they've left 20 years ago. So huge issue. I mean, a big side issue, which is just inclusion and whose responsibility is it? But I probably leave it there for now, just because of the sake of time. But connect with me on LinkedIn. We can talk more.
Yeah, no, well, I was going to say at the end of this, what's a good way to continue the conversation? So there we go. Connect on LinkedIn. Definitely a good way forward. You mentioned the piece around digital health, digital well-being, and you're writing a book on this. I think, and you just touched on that there in terms of the speed of news traveling and notifications and so on. Is this kind of technological change potentially the biggest disruptive influence on people's mental health that's happened, ever?
Yes, and like if you see The Social Dilemma on Netflix, which is a documentary about the topic, there's this horrific correlation between like young people's mental health and the start of Instagram and like literally suicide and self-harm just spikes, exactly correlating to when certain social platforms sort of opened up. I would point you in the direction, and I quote them a lot in my upcoming book. The Center for Humane Technology gives loads of insight and information, bite-sized statistics, but also things to think about. But two things. The world of work needs to be disrupted, right? We need to disrupt the world of work and the world of education because it is an old model that is made for factory work and, the old way of working. With technology, like I actually, so unfortunately, I feel like it might get worse before it gets better, but I'm actually an optimist about the future of work because I think we need these disruptors where everyone gets a little bit scared and a bit shaken up in order to go, oh, maybe there's another way to do things. I saw a comment just around meeting culture and like huge inefficiencies in the workplace. And groupthink means people just aren't questioning them in a proactive way. They might be complaining to their partner, but not actually going, hey, is there a better way to do this that's actually more efficient? So I have two young adults now as well, 20 and 18. So I've certainly been on the journey with them about their interaction. But when I talk to people, grown-ups who are my age and older, we're also saying, oh my God, I'm so frazzled. It's whether it's your emails or whether it's your phone, whatever it is eroding our ability and our skills for connection. Lack of connection is the thing that's messing with our mental health. So technology can be used for good, but it's lack of real, true connection that is really messing with our mental health. Those are the summary points from my upcoming book. But I could obviously rant on this topic a lot.
Well, perhaps when the book's out, we'll get you on and just do an interview and talk specifically about that. So it's interesting, isn't it? So it's coming down to, I guess, being more present, and what can we do to be more present and connect with people.
And I want to move us away from the gimmicky, because it's like, be more present, meditate, like do these things. Like, and I'm all for meditation, don't get me wrong, but I feel like we're layering on these well-being practices as if we always have to do more well-being. And actually, it's about letting go a little bit and learning to sit with yourself and listen to your own body. That's what we've forgotten how to do. What do I need right now? And if doing one small thing that you need is going to be more powerful than doing 22 things that an influencer told you to do and feeling frazzled at the end of it, right? And for me, the two key non-negotiables for my well-being are honesty and accountability. There's no bubble baths or lighting candles. It's honesty and accountability, right? And for everyone else, and I wonder if do you mind if I ask everyone a question to throw into the chat box? I'd love, because I see Nuala said something around breath work. I'd love to know, what is your non-negotiable when it comes to your well-being? If you just throw it in the chat, because I know there's loads of you. Because it's good to see, well, what are other people doing? What's useful for them? Beautiful. Movement is the single best way that's evidence-based to prevent burnout, by the way. And we haven't really gotten into that topic, but I love that I'm seeing some people there just talking about movement.
Yeah, I would say that's probably mine, because I find well, we ironically, we live quite close to one another, which we didn't know until we started talking about this. But people will often see me walking around the streets of Southeast London on the phone or whatever, just because I find if I'm just sort of chained to my desk, that has a negative effect on me, and I feel energized by getting out and moving, and even if it's just walking, but just moving gets the brain flowing and the blood pumping, and
Beautiful. I know that because if I was on stage talking, I would be moving around and my body would be kind of shaking out the stress of, the adrenaline of putting myself out there while I was talking. But because I'm sitting, and this is the world we live in now, I know, like, I've blocked out time after this because I've got to go outside and just shake it out, because it kind of stacks in your body. So you have to know yourself and know how to kind of burn the stress out.
Yeah. And it looks like lots of people are saying something similar in the chat here about walking, and sleep is a good one as well.
Oh, sleep, essential. And then Carol, a period of quiet and quiet space. We've got extroverts, we've got introverts, we've got people who have different needs for types of connection or types of movement, and that's cool. But what I'd then challenge you with is, you all said these beautiful things. How many of your immediate team or families know that these are the things that you need? Because that's normalizing conversations about mental health. Hey, I need a good night's sleep in order to perform at my best. I'm going to go to bed early just to stack up and do well. Or I've got to go for the walk or do the thing, right? That's how normal it is in my business. We go, hey, what's one thing you're doing to invest in your well-being today? Or if we're doing something stressful, we'll say, how are you going to complete the stress cycle? Now, that's a language from burnout specialisms, which is stress builds, you've got to burn it out. And so normalizing those kinds of sentences, a bit weird at first, but now my team, the most junior person, asks me, like, what are you doing for your mental health, Petra? That's the world I want to live in, where it's that normalized to check in on each other.
Yeah. there's some more stuff flooding in the chat, so that's good. We've got people talking, so that's always a good start. Before we wrap up, Petra, and I really enjoyed it and appreciate your time today. What would you say in terms of how can people learn a bit more about you and what you do? And you mentioned LinkedIn, but feel free to kind of plug any other things. And then
Sure.
have you got any particular resources or frameworks or sort of top 2 or 3 things that people could sort of take away from this and go and think about and sort of implement to try and make this a bit practical?
So this sounds like a shameless plug, but it's actually resources. I have a TED Talk that's on YouTube that's called 3 Ways to Live the Life You Want. And I've
There
got
you go.
3
Perfect.
very practical ways for you to think about your own well-being. And it's just sometimes a perspective shift, going, what do I want more of, not just what do I want less of? LinkedIn is my happy place. So I'm always on there, and I'd love to connect with as many of you as possible. And I mean, my website's just my name, petravelzeboer.com, where you can see more about training and the other stuff that we do. That would be cool.
Good stuff. LinkedIn's also my happy place, but taking on a point you mentioned earlier, on my phone, I've actually deactivated all my notifications on LinkedIn. I'd really love to deactivate my email notifications, but I kind of can't get over that as a next step. But perhaps I'll get there one
Start
day.
small and build
Yeah.
from there. I don't have any of the apps on my phone, like LinkedIn, so that I have to be at a desktop or a laptop. And I never watch the news. I know, shock horror. What? How do I survive? But there are ways that you can quite radically shift the negative influences and bring in positive influences.
Yeah, and I mean, it's an interesting one, that, because news is, it's mostly negative stuff, isn't it? If you really sit back and analyze what's
On
on the 6
repeat.
o'clock news, yeah.
On repeat over and over again. So how much is clickbait and fake news? How much is actual news? And how much do you need to hear on repeat? You could probably watch the news once a week and be fully up to date on everything. You know what I mean? So, and I know different jobs are different, but
yeah.
Oh, thanks, Tim. Sorry. Tim ordered my book. Thank you. Oh, I have a book. Yes, as well. Thank you.
It's all about the books, and another one on the way.
Yeah.
I'll give a shout out to Tim as well, because Tim's had some really difficult times recently. So it's great to see you back, Tim, and getting engaged. And thank you for joining us today. Great. Well, look, thanks so much, Petra. Really enjoyed it. I'm sure people will have got a lot from it. Thank you to everybody else for joining in and being really engaged with us as well. Love to see you in a couple of weeks for the next Safety Roundtable. We're switching gears. We're going from wellbeing into insurance, where I've got Robert Beasley from AXA XL, and we're going to be speaking about how do insurance companies perceive safety, and there'll be some really good things to learn there, and from the perspective of how can you be in the right position to work as your partner with your insurer to get the best deals, to protect against claims and all of that kind of stuff. But perhaps a little bit more stringent topic than what we've had today. So thanks everybody, and we'll look forward to seeing you again on another episode of the Safety Roundtable soon. Cheers.
Thank you.